Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another live edition of Rabbit Hole Radio. I'm your host, Popeye. It's April 9th, 2022. Do I have an interesting and mind-melting show in store for you tonight? I have a guest on who I have been wanting to get on for quite some time. He has been on Down the Rabbit Hole, my old original broadcast back in the day. And I've been wanting to get him on here. And I reached out to him last week and was like, hey, can you come on? And he was gracious enough to give us 2 hours of his time tonight. So I'm not going to waste too much time. I want to get into it with him. Okay. He has his own live streams. And like he does I know he does a live stream. I think it's a couple times a week. And I'm going to have him self-promote everything that he does on YouTube, where you can listen to what he has to say on the regular before we get into it. But he's also an author, and he's an amazing author. Okay? His name is Donald Jeffries. And before we do anything else, I suggest you write down the names of his books, because I'm going to urge you to go purchase a physical copy of each one of these books for two reasons. One, electronic stuff is great. Like I was telling Don off air before we came on here. I have one of his books on Audible. I have a couple of his books physically that I've gotten from him over the years, and I've purchased some. But I purchased one of his newer books on Audible so I could listen to it, because I like to listen to stuff on Audible. But at least half the books I have on Audible, I have physical copies of. And it sounds ridiculous, but the power goes out, EMP strikes, you can still read a book. It's really hard to erase a word, go and retroactively pull a word out of a book, but they can do so with an audio file. Even if it's downloaded to your phone, it could just update the file. You might not even know it, right? They could do so with an ebook. They did it with Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm. So anyway, I don't want to get too sidetracked. So I'm going to give you the name of these 4 books. So get your pads, get your pens out, and get ready. Here we go. Again, the author's name is Donald Jeffries, and he's my guest tonight. And here are his 4 books, and then we're going to bring him on. So first is Hidden History. Hidden History. Second is Survival of the Richest. The current one, the third one I'm reading right now, listening to on Audible, is Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1976 to 1963. Just phenomenal book. Absolutely phenomenal book. Urge you to go get all 4 of them, but definitely get Crimes, Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 to 1963. The reason being is that lays the whole trail out for you to follow, like Hansel and Gretel, okay, all the way up to the 60s. I cover the Kennedy assassination, 9/11, things that have happened since the Kennedy assassination. Donald's book, Crimes, Cover-Ups in American Histories, or Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776 to 1963. That book lays it out for you. I'm already on chapter 6. I got it yesterday, and I'm on chapter 6 already. I can't. It's one of those pieces of work that you get into, and it just, oh my God, I can't put this down. Like, oh, I have chores? That's nice. That's why I use audiobooks, so I can at least do 2 things at once. Anyway, great book. It lays out how we got to where we are today, because you can go back to the Kennedy assassination, but if you don't realize that it was going on long before that, you're not going to really have a good grasp of what's going on today. That's why so many people today that do podcasts or live streams or radio shows or whatever, they only understand the top 3-4% of what's really out there information-wise. So you have to get Donald's books, because he's an in-depth researcher, and he's been doing this since he was a teenager. He's been interested in this kind of stuff since he was a teenager. He's spent most of his life researching this stuff. Imagine the amount of information in his brain. Well, you can, because you can go read it in his books. And then the next one is Bullyocracy. Bullyocracy. His website is donaldjeffries.wordpress.com, and I know he's over at Substack too. So without further ado, let me bring him live to the airways here for you all to listen to and hear from. and I want him to shamelessly plug himself. So, Don, go ahead and you can unmute yourself and introduce yourself to my listening audience. Welcome back to the broadcast, my brother.
Well, it's a pleasure to be back, Popeye. It's been way too long, but I do want to make one correction. I actually have 6 books now. The first one was actually The Unreals, which is a science fiction, but it has lots of unexplained phenomena and UFOs and JFK assassination, a lot of stuff in it. So that's out there. And the latest book that just came out earlier this year was On Borrowed Fame: Money, Mysteries, and Corruption in the Entertainment World. So I read about corruption wherever it is, and there's plenty of it there as well. So if people want to check those out, they can as well. But so I'm writing Hidden History 3 as we speak, and I'm going back into even deeper diving on lots of things, including Lincoln, including Jefferson, including the JFK assassination, 9/11, up through Sandy Hook and Boston bombing and all that. So it's kind of lots of gems in there.
What's your Substack? Where can they find your writings there?
Substack it's called I Protest, which is the same thing as one of my shows, but thanks to my friend Tony Arterburn, it's been shortened to, I think they can get it if they just go to donaldjeffries.media. And they can find my Substack there. And I've gotten a lot of good feedback there. I have lots of subscribers now, so I'm writing there pretty regularly, so people can keep up. And if you want to see older stuff, the WordPress thing has also been shortened to donaldjeffries.news. You can go there, and that's my blog that I've had for Keeping It Unreal for years. So people can go back, and they can even find there. They can have a couple good days of reading, just reading past entries, especially because I have 2 or 3 chapters that were not included in the published version of Hidden History. Also, a couple chapters from Survival of the Richest. So I have some deleted chapters from my books there, so people can find extra information there to read.
Yeah, and see, I kind of thought you had more than I was going by the 4 that I knew you had, and I was like, I'm pretty sure he has other stuff too. So. You're just a great writer. You remind me a lot of you really do. You have a very similar writing and research style to Jim Marrs.
Wow.
And
yeah.
He was he was a good friend of mine, but he was one of my favorite authors.
Me too.
And your writing, and I know I didn't say this to you off air. I saved this, so for on air, but I mean that you really do. Your writing style is very similar, and it reminds me of Jim Marrs. It's very well researched, and it's so easy to digest for anyone, whether or not you're really in-depth, an in-depth researcher of this for years, or you're a newbie getting into it. So that's why I urge people to go get all your books. Can they buy them? Where's the best place to purchase them that'll help you the most? Amazon, or is there a different website?
There's people say that aspect. I don't know. Writers unfortunately get such a small royalty rate, and even books like Hidden History's done really, really well. It's sold very well it's by today's standard, but I don't get much from it. So I suggest people get the best deal that they can. I don't like Amazon as a company, but as a writer, there are benefits to somebody buying books from Amazon, because that's the only place that shows a sales ranking and reviews and ratings as well. Like Hidden History has a bunch of reviews now. But so that's where I do stress Amazon sometimes, just to try to get future works published. Publishers and agents are looking around. If they see a lot of reviews and they go down and check the sales ranking, oh, this one's selling. They might be more, people are influenced by that stuff. They might be more willing to publish something else.
Well, I urge people to purchase all of his books. And especially, all of them. I can't even pick one out over the other, because there's so much research in each of these books. They kind of back each other up, and they help explain. The more you read and the more information you take in, ladies and gentlemen, the more you'll be able to understand this stuff. That's why, like, in the first broadcast, when I first came back a year ago, the first couple months, I focused on going back over the basics, and I kept saying we're getting back to basics. We had to get back into that stuff, so that way, like when I have Donald on and I make a comment to him about something, and he pontificates for 15 minutes and drops, and the nuke level info bomb on you, you'll have a good understanding of it. I honestly, I think you really do. Your books are a great way for people to get into this, and I want to go over a bunch of them. Like, especially I want to focus on a little bit on crimes, cover-ups in American politics.
Sure.
And then we can get into modern day stuff. I know there's so much talk about with like censorship, like you and I were talking off air. It's like, I told you so,
Yes.
But let's take a step back in time for a second. Cause I think, like, as I said earlier, it's very important to look back at this stuff in the past to be able to understand what's going on currently and what's going to happen in the future. That's why we can say things like, oh, well, this is their idea for this is what they want to do. And then a couple years later, they're doing that. And people are like, well, how did you know that? Well, I'm not Nostradamus. I'm just a student of history. And I understand you can spot patterns out once you understand the pattern itself. Then you're like, oh, I see that happening now. So let's rewind a little bit and go back to at least I know there's lots of crazy stuff around 1776 and the Freemasons and the founding of this country.
Right.
And there's a lot of hidden history there by itself. And I know you have a bone to pick with Abraham Lincoln, so I want to give you ample time to get into Lincoln too. So if you had to pick like somewhere to start off with for the average researcher, to say they want to get more in depth into this, they want to have a better understanding, Donald, of things. Where would you tell them to look, like going that far back in time? Would you start off with 1776? Would you go closer to the Civil War? What would you focus on?
Well, yeah, I think that's why I started Crimes and Cover-Ups when I did. I think the founding of the Republic's a very important era. I think there's a lot of things for people to consider there. Number one is why so little attention has been paid to this area. And I talk in the book about, I just wrote a book about show business, huge movie fan, especially the golden age of Hollywood. I was always astounded that there was never any biopic of George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Benjamin Franklin, any of the founding fathers. And in fact, no really movie during the golden age of Hollywood about the revolution itself, Boston Tea Party and all that stuff. And I think it's pretty obvious why, because even then, the people that have misruled this country wanted to keep away from that era. We hadn't gotten to the woke part of it yet, where they weren't ready to demonize all those people as a dead white racist or anything. But they just didn't want the people necessarily to concentrate on that era, because they might start getting some ideas to realize how this country was born. Go back and look, and Thomas Jefferson is one of my heroes, and read all the great things he wrote about. That when the government's when this no longer suits you, you have the right to alter or abolish it. I mean, there are quotes out there forever what the founders intended. Look at the early battle, and the early political battle basically between two forces: the Federalists, which were led by Alexander Hamilton. And it's no accident that this is the only founding father that gets good press, and he's now a hip young black guy on Broadway. This was like the worst founding father. This is somebody, if he was alive today, he would be a member of the CFR. He'd be attending Bilderberger meetings. He'd be up in the redwoods worshiping the giant owl at Bohemian Grove. He'd be doing all that because he was a member. This guy would fit right in. He's the one who invented debt. He's the one that said, let's. Hey, man, we got to have the federal government assume all the debt of all the states after the revolution. Jefferson was, what are you talking about? So he invented the debt nation. And of course, he was the one that kept pushing the central bank. And that battle against Jefferson was the one who led the opposition to it. And that was a constant battle, for the first, all the way up to the Civil War. And thanks to Jefferson and later Andrew Jackson, who was another great foe of the banks, they kept that national bank at bay. Pretty much. And of course, we know we all lost in 1913 when the Federal Reserve, Hamilton must have been, cheering it on from the bowels of hell or wherever he's at when it was finally passed, because that's what they wanted. So a lot of bad precedents there that were set. Another thing that I'm writing about in my book now is that when we look at things today, the power of the judiciary, Supreme Court and federal courts, we see all these things that happen where the people, Trump may have attempted something and some federal court will rule against it. When people have had referendums, a federal judge will overturn it. All that is unconstitutional, every bit of it. And Thomas Jefferson recognized that early on. He saw what was happening right away. And he saw John Marshall, as the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, come up with this concept of judicial review. And basically, the judiciary usurped the authority. The beauty of our system was the checks and balances, the three separate and equal branches of the government: legislative, executive, and judiciary. Judiciary usurped their power right away, and nobody stopped them. Jefferson kept trying to, but the Federalists won out. And so from that very time on, the Supreme Court had way more power than they were supposed to, and they took on roles that they weren't supposed to take on. So now we come to our day-to-day. All these things are connected. It's like a timeline. You can see. So now when everybody, both the left and the right, nobody, except for me writing about it now, nobody's talking about a judicial review is unconstitutional. Everybody wants to get that power, and everybody hopes, the right hopes, that it's a conservative judge that rules the way they want him to, and of course the left hopes it's a crazed woke judge that rules the way they want him to. But it's not what it was intended to be. And as I pointed out, even with those battles going on, the first 15 presidents, with the exception of James K. Polk, and I'll write more about him in the book coming up, because the Mexican-American War was the first little foray outside the constitutional balance. That was an unconstitutional war, and we still see, again, the effects of these things go forever. That's why a group like La Raza was formed. As odious as they are, in many respects, they have a point. We did steal a lot of land from them, and we committed a lot of atrocities during that war, and I'll go into that in this book. But outside of Polk, the other 14 presidents, even though some of them were, to my taste, and there were a lot of battles between, you bet the bank and so forth, none of those other presidents overstepped their constitutional bounds. They all stayed within the framework of, they knew what their rights were and what their powers were. And then I come up to our boy Lincoln, 16th president of the United States, and he just obliterated the separation of powers forever. Checks and balances gone forever. He created the first imperial presidency. He tread and tore up the Constitution. He stepped on it with his muddy boots and just it made it almost a worthless document. And this book goes into great detail on his crimes that he committed. I mean, the tyranny was, and there's some good reason why he was called a tyrant by probably most of America back then. And he was rounding up. We still don't know how many prisoners he rounded up. Once he suspended the writ of habeas corpus, again, an unprecedented thing. And then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court ruled against him and said, you can't do this. And again, the judiciary had already assumed too much power, but Lincoln, I'm going to assume more. And he threatened to have the Chief Justice arrested. And he just went ahead with it anyhow. Lincoln was not going to be stopped. And they still don't know how many, some estimates 10,000, 15,000, they really don't know how many Northerners he arrested without charges. Sometimes they arrested them at church. They arrested them in the middle of the street. They arrested them in the middle of the night. They just break into people's houses and arrest them. This was unbelievable tyranny, and they were thrown into makeshift prisons. A lot of times their families didn't even know where they were. They were never told of any charges because there were no charges. They just had opposed Lincoln's policies, and that was enough. Time of war, he was allowed to do it. So that alone set so many. He shut down over 200 newspapers that published things that he didn't like. They criticized him. This is nothing like this had ever happened. And the fact that this guy has become our hero, our sacred cow, this is the secular saint of our civilization, says a lot about our civilization. And if you look at the way I go into that even more in Hidden History 3, but in this book I describe a lot of it, of the brutality of the total war concept that under the Union Army, the scorched earth policy. This was, back in ancient times, lots of atrocities happened, lots of civilians were killed, women raped, and so forth. But the Enlightenment, the Age of Enlightenment, and Thomas Jefferson represented, kind of epitomized the Age of Enlightenment. They recognized that there's, we've got to have some rules here, things that are outside the balance. So it was generally agreed that you left civilian populations alone. You didn't go after women. You certainly didn't have right to rape them. You didn't burn houses. You didn't burn crops. All the things that the Union troops ended up doing, especially under William Sherman, who was a genuine psychopath. And so I describe in detail. And people that, I don't know if you've got to that part of the book yet, but it's amazing. The brutality and the barbarity. I mean, if these weren't atrocities, I don't know what were. And these were the good guys. You got to keep in mind when you're reading that these are the people that they claim are our heroes. These are the people we worship because history is written by the victors, of course, and the North won. So, but I think it's important to remember that Lincoln, he set so many bad precedents, and they're still being, all throughout history. Just look at the delineation of the line. Woodrow Wilson come up to World War I. Woodrow Wilson justified throwing World War I people that were against the war, protesters, into prison, and he based it on the precedent set by Lincoln. Supreme Court upheld him. One of many horrible decisions of the Supreme Court. They upheld his right to do that. So then World War II, you come up and you didn't have many protesters for World War II because they didn't want to be thrown into prison, and they're established that you could do that. But you did have Japanese Americans and German Americans and Italian Americans. Now, nobody talks about the Germans and the Italians. They paid reparations to the Japanese, but they threw them into our own concentration camps. And again, in Hidden History 3, I'll have an update on that, because it wasn't until recently that I found out not only did they throw these people in concentration camps, but they took their property. They stole all their property. They stole their homes and businesses and never gave them back. Billions of dollars the government just stole from these people because they were the wrong ethnicity. Nobody talks about it. And so these are just great crimes, but it's all based on Lincoln doing it. And even down to, we go to Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, the atrocities that we saw committed there when Bush was president, George W. Bush was president. And his representative, John Yoo, justified what they were doing. And who did they cite as precedent? Abraham Lincoln. So his influence is never, and I suspect that if we had any civil libertarians left in America, apparently we don't, because nobody's protesting the prisoners that are still in prison every year later from January 6th. Some of them beaten, solitary confinement, held without bail, without charges. I mean, this is ridiculous for misdemeanor offenses, if there are any offenses at all. I suspect that if they were challenged, they would cite Abraham Lincoln as a precedent and say, well, this is an insurrection. It's the same thing as the War of the Rebellion back in the 1860s. So so much of this goes back to Lincoln. And that's why I spent so much time writing about him, because he really was just set so many bad precedents. And these things, the past is prologue, so we can see it even today.
And he's got this like messianic, Christ-like cultural like place in history now, where if you went back in time to when he was actually the president, people hated him. But fast forward to now, he's literally like a pop star. I mean, you pointed out in the book that they even made, what was it, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, like a cheesy, stupid movie about him, where he's this messianic hero.
Yeah, I mean, it's like basically it's superhero type sets, and that's the way, again, because the history is written by the victors, the people that, and especially now, and I go into great detail in that book. I'll go into more detail in Hidden History 3, but the idea that Lincoln and the Northerners were they were fighting to free the slaves, and they were enlightened, and they weren't racist. I mean, everybody alive in 1865, pretty much everybody was a racist, was a vile racist by today's standards, the way we look at things. Because again, that's the problem, is the people today, history itself, it hasn't been called racist yet, but it will be. I've said it for many years. Eventually, they're just going to claim history is racist, because they look at everything through the prism of today's lens, and today's lens is really screwed up. This woke lens we have now. So, I'm sorry, you're not going to find any transgender troops during the Civil War, no matter how hard you look. The concept, although they would like you to think that, I believe, the untold story of transgender soldiers. I can see it coming. But they have built this thing about Father Abraham, that this guy was an enlightened guy. And again, I have all the quotes on the record. I mean, he told you right from the beginning, hey, if I can, I want to save the Union, and if I can save it by freeing all the slaves, I'll do it. If I can save it by freeing none of the slaves, I'll do it. If I save it by freeing some of the slaves, I will. He's right on the record. He also has issued statements, especially the ones during the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858, where, they would make the Grand Imperial Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan blush. I mean, again, by today's standards. Just horrible stuff, and but that was the way the world was then. And Lincoln, if you look to his first inaugural address, Lincoln mentioned the word slavery 4 times, and in each context, it was that I'm not going to touch slavery where it exists. I don't believe I had the authority to do so. There's nothing in there about he doesn't condemn the institution of slavery at all. Now, this is when the war was starting, when he was pushing it. And again, the court historians, and I call them the court historians because that's what they are. They're basically like, the MSNBC and CNN journalists that we see today. I mean, they're state-controlled puppets. That's the way these court historians are. They get tenure at the universities, and they have nice salaries, and they're paid a nice sum to write books far different than the books I write, because they're not based on evidence. They're based on, they're trying to create cardboard caricatures. So they decided to people like Lincoln is the greatest hero of all. So they just ignore everything he did. And they try to take everything out of context, and they try to make it out like he was some fantastic enlightened man who was wounded to the core by slavery. And in reality, Lincoln was a pragmatic politician. He was his entire career. My all-time hero is Huey Long, and my book Survival of the Richest, I go into him quite a bit. But I'm a populist, so that's my boy there. But Huey Long very famously early on, bragged about, I have never taken a case against a poor man as a lawyer. He was representing the little guy. Lincoln was the exact opposite. Lincoln, I think it could be said, never took a case defending a poor man. He was a corporate lawyer. He represented interests, especially the railroads. He was in the hip pocket of the big railroad companies. And this guy was not, this Honest Abe rail splitter, and even the name Honest Abe. The evidence pretty much shows that this was a name of derision. Basically that his enemies christened him Honest Abe the same way you'd call a bald guy Curly. Because it was indicative of that he something he wasn't. It was the exact opposite, or call a fat person slim. Honest Abe was not honest. He had a bad reputation. He was a crass politician, and I have tons of stuff in this book where people can read it and they'll get the other side of it. And again, I used to love Lincoln like everybody else, and I have a section right after that where I go into his assassination, and I show that obviously it was not the conspiracy, because again, most Americans are historically illiterate largely. And so when they think of the Lincoln assassination, they might not know it was an admitted conspiracy, but of course they hung people, the wrong conspirators, and I think it's pretty obvious it was an inside job. So as bad as Lincoln was, you had some really sick radical Republicans led by his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, who I think probably was the orchestrator of the conspiracy. You had some radical Republicans that were even worse, and they didn't think Lincoln was being tough enough on the South. And I think they were scared that he was not going to be tough enough on them after the war. And we saw what happened after that. You had Reconstruction, and all these things tied together. Reconstruction saw the birth of the Ku Klux Klan, which is a defense mechanism against the horrible militarization of the South, where you had military troops occupying it. You had people not allowed to vote if they'd been Confederate soldiers. So it was just a terrible time. And they were giving former slaves, saying that's your property, and having them take over, plantations, mansions, and so forth. All that just, was added to the deep division in the country. And I don't know if that would have happened to the extent it did under Lincoln. Lincoln kind of intimated that it wouldn't have, but the way he waged the war, I don't know. But they apparently they didn't think so, because I think Lincoln's assassination was an inside job.
I agree. I did a show about this years and years ago, probably like 10 or 12 years ago. I did a podcast about this, and just about the assassination itself. Not so much. I mean, I covered that he was a tyrant briefly, but I didn't get into the details of, like, before the assassination like you did. But covering the assassination, it does seem that it obviously, the official version of events, just like anything else, is full of crap. But
yes.
I postulated that. Do you think, to the guy I was doing the broadcast with, I said to him, do you think that maybe, perhaps, and he had the same question, maybe they took Lincoln out because he had already, like you said, he had taken this step where now the federal government is pretty much tyrannical. It's become what it was not supposed to become, what the founding fathers had to, really put out there and started this country off as. It had now morphed into this monster after, he everything he did, becoming the tyrant that he did, what if they thought he was going to undo some of that now that the war wasn't there? Maybe Lincoln thought not saying he was altruistic, but perhaps he didn't think he needed to be such a heavy-handed tyrant during peace. Maybe he knew that if he seemed to be a more forgiving dictator now, maybe people wouldn't see him as a tyrant. Maybe they, he also probably realized that there would be more chaos if they didn't feather it in, as opposed to what they actually did do. Like you said, they added gasoline to the fire, and it's almost like they did it on purpose. Yeah. So do you think that maybe they killed him to be able to keep the powers that they had now newly acquired because of his actions as president?
Yeah, I think that was that's the motivation I would see, because they were constantly on him. And again, I don't know how much worse he could have waged the war from the standpoint of, the crimes against humanity, but the radical Republicans didn't think he was tough enough. And so, yeah, I think they probably were. And we don't, to be fair to Lincoln, I don't know. We don't know if maybe he would have, rolled all that back under peace. I don't know, because he was president the entire time. It was, an unprecedented situation. So I don't know, given his career and everything. I doubt it, but who knows? Maybe he was affected by. Maybe at some point he realized, wow, damn, 800,000 people, whatever, died because of this. I mean, maybe, I don't know. So it's possible he would have conducted things differently. I don't think he could have been worse than what we saw, because Andrew Johnson, his vice president, really didn't want to have that kind of a hard ass Reconstruction that happened, and I think that was the reason why he was impeached, actually, because he was at battle with Edwin Stanton again, who I think was the real guy running the government, and so I think it might have happened anyhow with Lincoln. I don't know. Maybe he would have been able to stop it, but that's all speculation. We don't know. All we can do is look at what happened, and somebody went to a lot of trouble to cover up the assassination of Lincoln. And certainly, during the course of the book, I was able to talk to several interesting people. And one of the people I talked to was John Wilkes Booth's great grandniece, because he didn't have kids, and Joanna Holme. Now, since that time, ironically, as we were talking before the show, I've been canceled by so many people because of Trump and COVID and everything else. Because I tend to be very divisive, I guess, when I write about these things. But so I guess I must have, and she must have either hate Trump or be wearing triple mask or something. But she deleted me from social media. But back when we were friends, she was telling me about how the family had been trying for a long time to get the body in Greenmount Cemetery in Baltimore, which is buried under John Wilkes Booth's name, exhumed, because that's one of the big conspiracy theories, is that he wasn't killed in Garrett's barn, and the body buried was not actually Booth's, and that Booth in fact lived on maybe to 1901 or something like that. So, but you can solve that mystery really easily, and all you have to do is look at how hard these things are to uncover, because if they exhumed that body, it wasn't John Wilkes Booth. That's not going to change anything politically today. But what it does do is it leaves all those court historians with egg on their face, and they look pretty silly calling people conspiracy theorists. And it might get a few people thinking, wow, maybe some of these other so-called conspiracy theories are correct too. They don't want to acknowledge that any part of the narrative is wrong. So they just keep it literally buried there. And it's ironic that in most cases of exhumation, it's up to the family. If a body's going to be disinterred, it will be because the family approves it. They don't block that if the family requests it. But in this case, the National Park Service is blocking it. And ironically, even an incident from even earlier, Meriwether Lewis and Lewis and Clark expedition, Meriwether Lewis was almost certainly murdered. This is back in the early 1800s. And they claimed he killed himself. And again, I talked to his great grandnephew during the course, and they're trying to get that body exhumed as well. Same thing. The National Park Service is blocking, and that would that would make zero difference in today's political world. But they're so they have so much invested in these lies that they don't want to be proven wrong about anything, because there may be a domino effect. Then maybe if they lied about Meriwether Lewis, they lied about Lincoln, maybe they did lie about JFK. Maybe they did lie about 9/11. Maybe even something recent like Seth Rich they're lying about. So they have to, I just think they're vested in this, and they literally will not admit that they're wrong about anything, because there's no, what other excuse is there? I mean, there's no reason in the world. The family wants it, it should be done.
That's something else I wanted to pick your brain about. I'm glad you brought Meriwether Lewis up. That blew my mind. I mean, all the conspiracy stuff I've researched over the years, I read that and I was like, wait, what? Wait, huh? I mean, Lewis and Clark, no one thinks there's any conspiracy or hidden history to it, but actually there is. And you actually reference a book in there, which I stopped. I was listening to it on Audible. I actually stopped what I was doing, paused the book, went and found the book that you were referencing, and I purchased that as well, because just that story about Meriwether Lewis blew my mind. So let's go over the hidden, whatever you want to, however deep you want to get into it. Again, okay, ladies and gentlemen, you have to buy his book. Get a physical copy. If you have Audible, for sure, get it on Audible. That way you can do two things at once. But I urge you always to buy physical copies of books, especially Donald's books, because his books will be like the first ones thrown into the bonfire.
Yeah, you're right about that. Meriwether Lewis was an up-and-comer. He was a young man on the rise. And he was a protege of Jefferson's again. So he was, to me, for my way of thinking, he was on the side of the people, the good side, because those days they hadn't split off. That was the modern Democratic Party was born under Jefferson, but they called themselves the Democrat Republicans. It was the Democrat Republicans versus the Federalists, which eventually became the modern Republicans. But Jefferson, it's just like we see where, Jefferson's protege earlier had been Madison and Monroe. Well, this latest one was Meriwether Lewis, who, of course, was this hero as part of the explorer team that Louisiana purchased and opened up all this new land, expanded the land size of the new United States greatly. So it was considered one of Jefferson's great successes. But he died under very strange circumstances, and again, you can read all the details in the book. But he was staying at this kind of outpost place. Of course, back then everything was remote. And a lot of questions about, it didn't seem to be suicidal. And, just the fact of who he was. And that's what, intrigued me, is that you almost might want to call him one of the first in the body counts, and if you read Crimes and Cover-Ups, you'll see Hidden History had, tons of body counts. Because, of course, I had, the Clinton body count alone, and the Bush body count are just, astronomical. But in Crimes and Cover-Ups, you'll see FDR had a nice body count. And in this case, Meriwether Lewis, I'm not sure he wouldn't have been a part of the presidential administration, I don't think, but it was kind of an anti-Jefferson body count. In the book you referenced that you wanted to read, but I think it's called The Jefferson Conspiracies. And I was attracted to it just because the guy who wrote it actually is mentioned in the Warren Commission for some unknown reason, the Warren Report too, kind of a little interesting tidbit. But he had the dramatic sense of timing to die right before it was published, and that always gets my attention. We know George Orwell died like right before 1984 was released, and Stephen Knight, died right before a book called The Brotherhood, exposing Freemasonry in England, was released. So that always gets my, when the author dies right before, something, I don't know why, especially when it has a title like The Jefferson Conspiracies, but it's kind of a complex subject, because, I mean, he almost makes Jefferson look like he might have been culpable, which I doubt very much. But I tend to think that this was his political enemies, and they were Jefferson's political enemies as well. And I just think they decided to knock off somebody that was an up-and-comer and would have continued Jefferson's legacy, and was much younger. So he would have been able to continue the battle against the banks and all the other things Jefferson was fighting for.
Do you think there was anything that they found on their excursion that maybe they didn't want them to talk about? Maybe it's just totally I'm on Speculation Island. Yeah. I've set up a tent and sure. And I have the bar going. But do you think that they, that there was anything that they maybe found, like ancient ruins or something that they might have discovered?
Well, if they did, we wouldn't know, would we? But yeah, sure. Maybe they discovered a bunch of Bigfoots. I don't. But I mean, yeah, it's that would be possible because this was all untouched terrain. And they were going and finding all this new land. So yeah, that's possible. That thought crossed my mind. And again, obviously, if they had, you wouldn't know anything about it. And again, when people that do that, one of the greatest examples of that is the Admiral Richard Byrd, the world's maybe the greatest explorer of all time in modern times. This guy, you can still go to YouTube, I think, and still see that video where he was the first man to reach the South Pole. And, because of what happened, they had the Antarctica Treaty after that. And, so it's all kinds of speculation about flat Earth, aliens there, hollow Earth, all because they have a treaty and you can't go see much of Antarctica now because of that. But Admiral Byrd was on TV, and this guy should know. And he just happened to talk about this great landmass beyond the Arctic, that the Antarctic, which was greater than the landmass of the United States and has all the natural resources we would need. And say, wait a minute, what? That I've never heard of that before. And I actually talked to Admiral Byrd's grandson during the course of researching the book, but he didn't seem to know much, or acted like he didn't know much, and he never called me back. But and of course, Admiral Byrd himself died not long after that television show, and we never heard any more about the landmass behind, beyond the Antarctic, and they had the treaty.
Well, the weird part is, he came back and he reported on it.
Yeah.
And people are like, that's crazy. But they sent him out for round 2. So, if he was crazy, why would they send him out with a whole nother force?
Right. Exactly.
They would have locked him up and been like, no, we're not wasting a single dime on this.
Yeah. And they never said it was crazy.
Whether or not his story is fake or not, right? They could have made it up to cover something else up. But what about the stories of the Nazis in New Swabia up in there, New Schwabenland?
Right. Yeah. So that's when you have these kind of things, people speculate about anything. It's flat Earth, hollow Earth, Nazis, aliens. I mean, all these something that we can't even comprehend. But you're right about that, and nobody ever addressed what Byrd said. It's not like they addressed it and said, "Well, this guy's obviously crazy." They continued to treat him like a hero, and then he just happened to die not long after that, and it was thrown into the dustbin of history. And that's why it's the term memory hole is so beautiful that Orwell came up with, because that was Winston Smith's job. At the Ministry of Truth. He was supposed to find these. So if he was looking like in my books, hell, he'd be pretty busy. But he'd throw these things down the memory hole, and that's exactly what they did with Admiral Byrd's thing. So if Meriwether Lewis had been, or had access to some kind of airways where he could have said, "Hey, we discovered this and that," you can bet that probably would have been thrown down the memory hole as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure they probably saw things here or there. It'd be interesting if somebody took a deep dive into that. But I had no clue that there was even any conspiracy involving his death. And it's interesting because I find parallels with many different people throughout history like him. Okay, so you have someone who, in their younger age, did this big expedition. They are now like a cultural icon of the time, right? People would have looked up to him. He would have been like a celebrity, so to speak, at that time. And starts to foray into politics, and then sudden death. Patton was gonna come home and get into politics. He was resigning, and they killed him before he could get home because they didn't want him to talk about anything about what he knew, what was really going on behind the scenes.
Right.
They wanted to paint a different picture there. He stood in the way, and he was already a pain in the ass during the war, but they needed him. But now they didn't need him anymore. So they had the OSS kill him. And that was that.
The story in Patton too is that you had a guy you might know, and I always forget this guy's name, Zapata, or I can't remember, but this guy came out publicly and said, "Yeah, we killed him. I was the guy that killed him." And he said, "I assassinated Patton." Not only did nothing happen to him, he went on later to serve on the staff of Senator John McCain, one of the craziest war hawks we ever had.
Douglas Bazanta was
Bazanta, that's it. Yes, that's it. Yes. I mean, how does that happen? And that didn't affect your career at all?
Right. Of course he went to work for McCain.
Perfect choice.
Yeah, whose father was instrumental in setting up the USS Liberty to be bombed and attacked, or at least allowed them to be attacked, and then also was instrumental in helping recall, as was Johnson, having the fighters that were sent out recalled, so that they couldn't defend the Liberty. That's kind of a sore subject with me. I know a lot of those guys. They're, over the years doing radio, I've interviewed a bunch of them, and I'm become close friends with them. And as a veteran myself and a sailor, myself, that's kind of a personal hot button issue with me. But yeah, same thing. So they're all dirty. The whole point of bringing these people's names up, ladies and gentlemen, is to point out that you can see that they are all interconnected. They actually are connected to multiple types of conspiracies or events. And the definition of conspiracy needs to be taken back. Everyone likes to we're taking the power back in our words. Well, I'm going to take back the power of the word conspiracy. It doesn't mean ghosts. It doesn't mean the paranormal. It doesn't mean UFOs. It doesn't mean Bigfoot, which are all subjects I'm highly interested in and I think are very interesting to research. I'm very open-minded. Okay. So nothing against any of those subjects, but they're all in their own categories.
Right.
Conspiracy is a legal definition. It's a charge that you can have put against you. What do you think they charged the January 6th, quote unquote insurrectionists? What do you think they charged them with? Conspiracy. So you can't have it both ways. It can't be a legal charge that you're going to hold somebody in jail indefinitely under, and have it mean fake. That's not what it means. It doesn't even mean fake. See how they changed the meaning of words. So I want to take back the power of the word conspiracy. Everybody wants to take word power back. Well, our word power to take back is conspiracy. It means two or more people getting together to do something bad, i.e. a plot. I'm literally from memory, from reading the definition. I don't know what it is now because I don't have it in front of me, but from memory, I can read it and I could tell you that's what it used to mean. Now they've probably changed it. It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, you're right. Illegal, but virtually that's why people tell me all the time, "Oh God, you believe everything's a conspiracy." I don't back off and think, I said, "Well, yeah, actually I do, because we're being run by conspirators. This is the only way they've ever known how to do business. This is standard operating procedure for them. They don't know any other way. They conspire when they don't even have to. They're like, if you've met like really habitual liars, that they lie even when they don't have to. They lie about stuff that doesn't even matter because they're pathological liars. These people are pathological conspirators. They conspire even when they don't have to. So they withhold things they don't even, like a lot of the classified information with JFK and all that stuff. When it's released, why was that withheld? It doesn't even make any sense. But they do it just because this is the way they operate. They don't know any other way. They want to conceal things. And this is, they operate in the darkness. They hate sunshine laws. And so they fit every definition of conspiracy because they're conspiring. There you said, you're working with one or more other people against the interests of the public, or working in secret. This is what they do. So yeah, when people say, you think everything's a conspiracy, if you're out there listening, because you probably do as well, say, yeah, actually I do, because we're being run by conspirators. That's a good way to answer them, because just the words, well, no, I don't think well, yeah, actually, because all these things I investigate, I don't know that I've ever looked at any significant historical incident, and just with just a little bit of an examination, just a little bit of look at the real evidence, you realize, wow, they're lying. And the narrative is really messed up. And you find out all these narratives fall apart with just the least bit of scrutiny. And so I don't know what they're telling the truth about. I really don't know, because if you look at any of them, really, that's why anything that happens, even if it looks cut and dry on the surface, I just assume they're lying, because I know how things have worked historically. They never tell the truth about anything. And that's the way I approach it. And I still research it, but I'm never disappointed, because it's always the same way. You find out that they've misinterpreted evidence. Their favorite misinformation or disinformation. Well, that's all these narratives are. They're 100% misinformation or disinformation.
Like Kennedy said, ladies and gentlemen, we are opposed around the world by
Yes.
monolithic and ruthless conspiracy.
Yep.
Right? I mean, he
Yeah.
says it right in that speech. He says the word conspiracy. So is Kennedy the first conspiracy theorist then?
Well, no, but yeah, I think he's the only president, probably the first one to say that. But
Yes.
what as I'm researching now, and in this book I write about Pearl Harbor and crimes and cover-ups, but I'm going deeper into it with McCarthy. And people are kind of astounded. They don't know what to think of me as far as left and right, because in this book, I come out in defense of Joe McCarthy, who's been thoroughly demonized, but I also come out in defense of the Rosenbergs, who, and so people think, what? How that kind of makes their head explode. I think they're both victims for different reasons of the fake Cold War, but the researchers that helped me out a lot has sent me some information. I have a nice longer section on McCarthy in the Hidden History 3, and he was actually the first conspiracy theorist about Pearl Harbor. He wrote about it and talked about it on the record. He actually talked about it in Congress, so that kind of surprised me. And I don't think it's any accident that. And McCarthy, by the way, was good friends with the Kennedys, especially the old man, Joe Kennedy. He dated one of the Kennedy daughters, was the godfather of one of RFK's oldest daughter. So this guy had the right friends, and of course he had the right enemies. He had Truman, FDR, basically the entire media. But he goes into Bethesda Naval Hospital again, where Kennedy would go for the world's worst autopsy, and he dies 2 days after going in. He goes in for a knee problem. He's 48 years old. He goes in for a knee issue, and he dies 2 days later. So it's interesting, but these things are connected. Bethesda Naval Hospital is the scene. Before McCarthy went in there, James Forrestal was the first Secretary of Defense. There was Secretary of War before him under Harry Truman. He jumps out of a high-rise window in Bethesda Naval Hospital. Clearly somebody pushed him, but he was the first critic of Israel. He was a very interesting guy, and he was a good friend of McCarthy's. And I quote this a lot of times. I say this on other interviews, but one of the great quotes, I think, in the history of this kind of research is Forrestal telling McCarthy. He said, McCarthy, if this wasn't a giant conspiracy, once in a while they'd make a mistake in our favor. And that's the way I look at it, is that if this wasn't a consistent, consistent organized thing, organized corruption, of conspiratorial activity, that once in a while somebody good would emerge. Once in a while somebody honest would get power. Once in a while there'd be enough people in Congress, so there's some really good legislation. Hey, this really made things better. Once in a while it would happen. Once in a while somebody besides JFK, who did say no to war over and over again, would say no to war, but it never happens. And that can't happen, randomly, because randomly you would have good people that would rise up sometimes. Never happens. And so you had, those two deaths at Bethesda, and then you had, of course, JFK's autopsy Bethesda. So Bethesda's kind of was the scene of some great crimes all by itself.
Yeah, if you're working for the government in any way, shape, or form, and you have some sort of government benefit package, and you get sick, don't go to Bethesda Naval Hospital.
No, don't.
If you have any type of security clearance, if you're like a mail clerk, you're probably fine.
Yeah.
If you have any level of security clearance, I would suggest you go elsewhere.
Stay away from the windows.
Stay away from windows. Don't go to Bethesda Naval Hospital. That's the takeaway from that.
Absolutely.
I'm going to pause this right there, Donald, because wow, the first hour already flew by, as I knew it would with you. Ladies and gentlemen, as I told you, he is a fountain of information that you could just sit and drink from for hours, and your mind will just melt with the amount of info that he'll download into you. It's amazing. You have to read his books. Donald knows what he's talking about. As I said, he writes like he talks. So he's very well researched, and the books are easily digestible. Don't go anywhere. We're back in a few short minutes. Stay tuned. Show KGRA some love. Thank you, Bill, super producer. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. Hour number 2 here on tonight's live edition of Rabbit Hole Radio. It is April 9th, 2022, and I'm hanging out with friend and author Donald Jeffries. Donald, before we get back into it, where can people hear your show?
Well, I have 2 shows. The Donald Jeffries Show is every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Time on Ocelli.com. That's where it airs live. It also gets rebroadcast on, I don't know, several, like 19 radio stations across the country, mostly in the West, but on the delayed, probably 3 in the morning, considering the subject matter. And also Jeff Rentz. I appear every Monday night on Jeff Rentz, who has a nice big network, at 9 p.m. Eastern every Monday night with him. We have good conversations, and he's kind enough where he rebroadcasts the Donald Jeffries Show, I think 4 times a week, everyone, so you can catch it on his network. And then I Protest is on rockfin.com, where Sam Tripoli and some other nice people are over there now. And I also live stream it on my YouTube channel when they're not when they're letting me do it. You know, I always have strikes against me there. I'm still hanging on. And my Facebook page and my Twitter page, so people can catch it live streaming at Rockfin or those places, and that's 5 to 7 p.m. every Friday.
Awesome.
Eastern.
And throw out your Twitter and your Substack and your website and anything else real quick.
Twitter should be at Don Jeffries. Substack again is donaldjeffries.media, and my blog is donaldjeffries.news.
All right, awesome. Yeah, I want to make sure we plug, because there's so much to talk about, and I could easily get lost into conspiracy chats with you. And I want to make sure we plug everything. So, and again, go get all of Donald's books. I'm not saying that because he's on, or because I consider him a friend. If nothing else, if I never interviewed him before, if I didn't know Donald from anyone else on the planet, if I had just met him 10 minutes ago, but I've read his books, I would tell you, go get his books. As a researcher, I'm telling you, get the books. He's one of the things I appreciate about you in your work is that you cite a lot. I mean, just like Ike is known for doing this too, and so is Jim Marrs. There's just a ton of reference material from what you write about in there. So you're like, not only are you saying, XYZ, but you're saying this is where I found it, and go research it for yourself. Right. And you urge people. That's like I said, I purchased another book about the whole Lewis and Clark expedition and that whole conspiracy and what happened there from what you had recommended in your book, one of the things that you used as source material. So like, I respect that as a researcher. I have a lot of respect for an author who does that and doesn't just put it out there like it's his material, but also puts out and says, look, this is what I've compiled, but here's where you can go find it for yourself. I respect that. So that's why I urge people to go read your books, because they are great reference material.
Well, thank you. And I try to source everything, and because it drives me crazy. And there are good books out there that don't footnote things, and I don't understand it, because we could just make stuff up. I have to know where'd you get that from? Where's that quote from? And sometimes it's hard to find, because I got to tell you, a lot of nuggets you find out there are just on some conspiracy guy's blog, and they sound great. I try as much as I can to source it. And the thing about the people that misrule us is that, most of it is out there hiding in plain sight. So if you look at my sources, a lot of them are just mainstream media. And you can find it, because they basically, it's like, the occultic thing. I talk about this a lot. There's I'm sure you're familiar with that too, is that they have to tell you what they're doing. And there's a lot of that out there where they'll say, yeah, it's here. But because they know, even though they're telling you and it's right out there for anybody to see, most people still don't care. And when you tell them, they just give you that blank look. And that's the problem, isn't it? No matter how obvious it is, they just give you that blank look. Don't you see how significant this is? No. Did you see this picture of my cat? I mean, that's the way it is.
It's revelation of the method. And there's different reasons why they would do it, but if you look at the occulted, the hidden reason why, and again, ladies and gentlemen, when you hear a researcher or an author or myself or anybody else talk about the occult, the hidden, and or dark occult or anything, even if your religious belief system does not allow you to believe in such things, that's fine. But you have to check that at the door to understand that the people that we're talking about do believe in it. And it doesn't matter if it's real or not. What matters is their belief and their intent and their energy is focused on this. So it is real and it does affect you, even if you don't believe in it. And yes, there's a lot of occult things there. Their belief that they have to tell us, from my research, this is what I've gathered over the years, but it's a karmic deal. So they believe that there's a universal law that if we are told what's going on and we allow it to happen, then the karmic debt from those actions, the negative actions, doesn't fall on the people that did it because they told us and we allowed it to happen. Mm-hmm. And if that, I mean, they do have access to information that most of society and humankind does not. So maybe there is some universal rule that says this, right? Mm-hmm. But it doesn't tell you how they have to tell us. So they can tell us in parable, they can tell us in music, they can tell us, in cartoons, which they do. You find it all throughout entertainment, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Predictive programs. They and again, I don't know why it is. It's like, I guess, the vampire having to ask permission to enter the house or something. It's very strange, but a lot of that is out there, and that's why look at all the pictures from especially the Civil War era. I investigate that. Just look at all those guys with their hands inside their coat. The Masonic pose. I mean, it's like, I mean, do they have to do that to pose for a picture? I don't know. Are they just advertising it or whatever? But it's there's a reason. Hand. Yeah, the hidden hand, and it's there. It's everywhere to see. I mean, you're like, wow, did all these guys? I guess they're all in the Masons. Well, of course, they were a big thing back then. But
it's like nowadays you see all the people, all the movie stars or sports people or celebrities or whatever. When they take pictures, what do you see? You get the one eye club.
Yes, the one eye. Yes, the hand, the circle around their eye, the black eye club. Yeah, I mean, it's just it's the hand signals with the hook 'em horns. I mean, they're always doing weird. And I tell people, I don't know what any of that means necessarily, but I do know that, I've taken a lot of pictures of my life, my family, and, I can look through the pictures and I don't think you're going to find one anywhere where somebody's doing a weird thing on their face or weird things with their fingers. That's just, nobody poses like that unless they're trying to make a point. And obviously they are. So I don't know. Then you get into all kinds of things.
You don't take selfies, Donald, with one hand over your eye?
No.
You don't do that?
No, I don't.
I thought on the back of your newest book that was going to be your, the author profile picture was going to be you holding your one hand up.
Yeah, then people will know that, okay, he's been bought out. I guess he made the deal.
Right. If I see you with your hand over your one eye, I'll be like, oh no, they got him.
Yeah, they got me. No, that's no. I don't think you'll ever see that. But history is important, even if you're not interested in it, like I am. I've always loved history before I even knew there were any conspiratorial, implications to it. I just loved history. I just, because I think it's, Santayana said, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. And we obviously have forgotten the past because these things happen over and over again. If you just look at what we've witnessed recently in the news with, this crazy Ukraine thing with I stand with Ukraine as worship, the demonization of Putin. And all you have to do is just go back to 1898, which was the first real false flag in American history, the Remember the Maine, where we took crossed many of those lines in the sand, where America pretty much ventured internationally out there, first kind of global excursion, where we decided, well, we had to go and fight the Spanish in Cuba, which was ridiculous. We had we invented a pretense for it. Well, the Spanish sunk the Maine, and of course, and what happens is with these false flags is that in subsequent years, the court historians would admit, well, yeah, actually the Spanish didn't sink the Maine, so it was bullshit. It was a complete lie. but it still was a pretense for the war, the unnecessary war. And then you had World War I. You had the sinking of Lusitania. They tried the same thing again. The Germans sunk the Lusitania. We have to get into war. Same thing. Court historians later would say, "Oh, actually, no. The Germans kept saying, no, we didn't do it. No, they didn't sink it. So, but it doesn't matter. We got into war, didn't we? And of course, Pearl Harbor, probably the granddaddy of them all. Or even now, you can have your reputation, destroyed by just saying that FDR had foreknowledge when, all the evidence says he did. There's literally no evidence that he didn't, that it was a surprise attack. So, and I go into that a lot in this book. And so all the way down to the present era, they didn't, they tried, except I guess they're just not good at it anymore, because they tried, I think, to set up a thing with Putin where first they claimed he bombed a kindergarten. Yeah, okay, this is great military strategy. Let's go bomb a kindergarten. And then it was I think was a maternity hospital or something. Oh, that's another. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. We're going to go do that to the world. The wrath of the world comes on us. And for whatever reason, it didn't work. They kind of dropped it. But, obviously the weapons of mass destruction with Saddam Hussein, that kind of thing, which, obviously they never resisted. They're still looking for them. But people fall for it over and over again. So if they come up with a good enough false flag, you want to create World War III, the people, the descendants of the people that fell for those other ones will fall for it, unfortunately, because there's not enough of us out here, saying, that's ridiculous. How could you possibly be that stupid? But that's, the problem, Popeye, as I say all the time, is that nothing's going to change until more of us are awake than are asleep. And I think it should be obvious, especially going over this pandemic, when you're looking around at who's wearing a mask and who isn't, and we're really, really outnumbered. It's very disillusioning to know how much we're outnumbered by, and that's been a great disappointment to me the last couple of years, to realize. I knew we were outnumbered, but man, I thought there were a few more of us, but no, unfortunately, they've got us outnumbered.
It's surprising to me to see how many people actually fell for that, given how smart and how awake many people were. And it was, actually, that's about when I actually came back. The winter of 2019. I started going on live streams on KBS, on the Kev Baker show, over on his YouTube live streams on the weekends, because I was starting to see videos out of China where people were dropping, and I was like, look, I don't know what's going on over there, but eventually it'll make its way over here. We're in an enclosed globe, right? Yeah. So eventually it's gonna get over here. So I'm not, although you should be worried about a virus and just, whatever you have preps for that. But besides that, what you should really be worried about is the government's reaction. Mm-hmm. And people were like, you're fear mongering. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you. And then the hammer dropped, and it was, they were starting to slowly drop the censorship hammer on people. And I couldn't go on Kev's broadcast anymore. The sound of my voice actually demonetized so many of his shows. So they made him delete. He let me download all of the shows I did with him, and then YouTube made him delete those episodes in order to get his monetization back. And they suspended it for a month. And Kev, an R.I.P. to Kev, miss your brother.
Yes.
And he relied on that money, and so they knew. They know how to control people, man. And I didn't want to be part of that. So I had to step back. And then shortly thereafter, myself, my girlfriend, who she did radio too, her name is Rad Chick. She's got a huge, she talks about Fukushima and other radiation events and other nuclear events. And she's, been interviewed all over the place for it. Well, she got depersoned too. She was like, hey, maybe before you take the vaccine, you should check what's in it. Do a little research. Boom.
Yeah.
Literally, she was like, hey, and she wasn't fear mongering. She was like, maybe you should do your, boom, you're gone. I posted something about they're going to come for all of us, basically. And boom, I was gone. Literally the post that I put up was like, hey, they're going to come and delete everybody. And then they deleted me for it. And there was literally no, you're suspended for 30 days, Popeye. You were bad. We're going to review your account. It was gone. And it was like, click here if to upload your ID. And I was actually verified with my press passes and stuff over that I have from years ago with them. So I was like, all right, well, I uploaded all that info again, hit submit, and immediately was like, no, your account's been terminated and you will never get it back. So says the Sith Lord. And that was it.
Wow. Yeah, it's a great way. I lost so many, because I've been talking JFK, 9/11, all this. Sandy Hook, I lost a few, but this thing, I lost so many people. My niece, my nephew. So many people canceled me, and so many people that had loved hidden history, loved Survival of the Richest. Loved my first few books, even Crimes and Cover-Ups. Some of them who had given it good reviews, who had interviewed me, and they suddenly said I was dangerous, deleted me as a friend, and threw me down the memory hole. So it was very discouraging. But I also got a lot more supporters because there were a lot of people that were waking up to this, and that's the problem. Is that Popeye, is that now those of us that are awake and the ones that are waking up are more awake than ever. So we're really, really awake. So we don't have the tolerance anymore for it. I mean, it just kind of pisses me off now. When I see people out and about, and I see, even now, I see some parent with their mask on outside, and they have their little kid with a mask on. It just, I mean, the libertarian in me is I don't want to go interfere with what they're doing, but it's just, you just shake your head. It's like, how can you be that stupid? Really, they have babies out there now. They're talking about how that babies first learn to talk by reading lips. So these idiotic parents that are holding their kids with masks on, they literally are preventing them from learning how to speak. And it's just, not to mention the other damage they might be doing by covering up they can't breathe properly. I mean,
the medical data is out there on this too. They'll say it's anecdotal because the government hasn't funded any research or a study into it, right? So I mean, that's the way they get things. They'll classify something as well. There really isn't any research into it. You mean you guys haven't funded some BS research into it? Right. To come up with some BS answer. There's plenty of research. They'll just say it's all anecdotal. It doesn't, there's really no way, you have to have a control group. And so they said the same thing about marijuana. And now it's like, suddenly marijuana's okay because you guys figured out how to tax it and make money off of it. Okay. Right. I see how that works. But the COVID thing, it's been very divisive. I mean, there's, people are like, well, you think it's fake? And I'm like, no, I never said I think it's fake. I think there's something out there. I think they made a bioweapon is what I think. I've been saying it since day one. It acts like a bioweapon. Whatever hit here first acted like a bioweapon. They even said they're like that first wave of whatever it was, COVID, whatever you want to call it, that first infectious wave that hit, it was rough. I mean, I got sick in the end of November, beginning of December of 2019. And I had never been so sick in my life. I thought I was going to die. And I went to the VA hospital here, and they gave me, they told me I had basically like walking pneumonia. And they gave me all sorts of antibiotics and stuff. But, once this thing that came over here, whatever it was, this bioweapon that was released from Wuhan, we'll call it, right? That once that arrived here, that initial stage of it, the first wave, was it hit, and even the media and doctors were like, yeah, it's weird. It gets you sick and wears down your immune system. And then the second wave is much harder and pounds you, and that's what's killing people. And that's what is causing the lungs to fill with fluid and everything else. And that reaction, and it was kicking off the body's reaction, which would then cause the fluid to fill up the lungs. And I was like, wow, that's like a military attack. You send in the first wave to, be cannon fodder and to not so much weaken, but kind of distract the defenses. And then the second wave comes in, and that's the stronger wave. That's the pummeling wave, so to speak. And that's the way it was with this virus initially. I was like, oh, wow, it's behaving like a bioweapon. And then all these bioweapon specialists were like, wow, this thing's behaving like a bioweapon, whatever it is. But that's just a conspiracy theory. How dare you? It was from a bat and a pangolin having relations. Wait, what?
Right.
What?
Well, the
What?
fact that, yeah, again, the fact that they lie about everything, and again, from the very beginning, I was publishing all the info, and again, it's out there. It's out there. I tell people, and this, I'm not theorizing at all. I'm telling you, I'm just usually using nothing but CDC and WHO documentation. And the CDC early on in April 2020, they sent out a directive to hospitals that said you are to list the cause of death as COVID-19, even if the patient was never tested for it. Doesn't get much more corrupt than that. And again, that's the CDC saying. I published it, got a bunch of new fans, lost a lot of people too. Oh, that's crazy. Oh, the CDC saying it, not me. It's not Don Jeffries, the CDC. And then you had I had John Rappaport on my show early on, and he was the first one to say, hey, they're including presumed cases. And sure enough, if you look at the CDC weekly updated figures, and they would, for the record, the deaths figure, they would fluctuate all over the place. They would literally go up and down at will. But again, nobody's looking at them except people like me. They sent it out. You can get it. You get it on their website every week, their weekly update. And every one of those updates had a disclaimer. Note, contains presumed figures. In other words, it presumed cases. So it concludes cases where it hadn't been proven that they had whatever this is. So again, the entire thing is phony. And then you had the things like in Italy after the thing there, where Italy came out afterwards and said, well, no, actually almost no one died from this there. It was all old age. And so and they've said it a couple other times, the other comorbidities killed almost all. They actually died from something else. So the whole thing has been monumental disinformation from the very beginning. And, you look at the social distancing thing, the 6-foot thing, the history of that goes back to a little girl in 8th grade who used that figure for a science project. That's the science behind it. That's what they're taking an eighth grade science project, and this is science. And then, of course, the mask, Fauci and all the rest of them said they didn't work. It's just absurd. These masks do nothing at all. And then, of course, all the I said, every time I would go to a restaurant, I'd make a big production. I say, well, okay, and we have to put the mask on to walk in, but as soon as we get to the table, we can take the mask off because the virus can't get us here. It hovers around the doorway and everything, but you sit at your table and you're safe. I mean, people were doing all these kinds of mad things. And when I go to a dentist office, you have to wear it in the waiting room, but as soon as you go back to the waiting area, you can take it off before. It's like what is this based on? It's absolute nonsense. And the problem is, this is where we're at. And that's what I'm dealing with now in my family, because everybody, except for my son and to a lesser degree, my wife and daughter, they've all bought it. And they are dyed in the wool. So I don't think I'm ever going to see them again. I don't know that I want to tell you the truth, because I'm not vaccinated and I'm not going to get vaccinated. And this is a horrible thing, because it's created more division than the Civil War ever did in this country.
It certainly has. And like I said to you off air earlier, this is literally like the Milgram experiment on steroids. And you literally now, instead of pushing a button and you can't see the person on the other side, but you think you're zapping them with electricity, they've stepped it up to, my neighbor is outside. Donald's outside and he's breathing air without a mask on, and he's not in a level 3 bio suit. Could you please send the SWAT team? I feel threatened by his freedom.
Yes.
And his choices. Could you please send a SWAT team? Thank you.
And all this is connected now too, because I said, I don't delete people, but I have the maximum amount of friends on Facebook, and I have a bunch of waiting lists of people that I haven't got. I don't monitor it very well, but so a lot of times I'll see somebody post something and I say, okay, how did I become friends with this person? So they had something like that the other day where this woman said, like, okay, if you found out your neighbor was one of the insurgents, would you report them to the authorities? And I'm saying, what the hell? So I'm looking, and literally she had like 100 and some answers, and almost every one was hell yes, treason. I think this is the state of the country. They can't wait to turn somebody in for. I mean, just imagine that. Of course, during that you had a couple examples of, which is, you talk about messed up families, where it was one case where a daughter was watching on TV and saw her mother, and ironically saw her mother bloody on TV because she'd just been beaten by a cop. And she saw her, and instead of, oh my God, mom got beaten, She immediately called the police to report her mom because she was down, at the Capitol. I mean, this is the state of America today. So it's no wonder that families are falling apart over something like this, because we've created such a dysfunctional society, and it shows up everywhere. And the fact that we can have a situation like, I harp on this January 6th stuff over and over because I'm a civil libertarian, maybe the last civil libertarian in America. So I need to please close the door, I guess. It's amazing. 50, 60 years ago, if you had those prisoners in D.C., the ACLU would be involved. You had people like my hero and mentor, Mark Lane. They would be talking about this. You'd have Democrats in Congress, liberal Democrats. You'd have at least some of them saying this is an outrage. You can't hold people like that without charges. You can't hold people indefinitely like that. There's rumors of being beaten and held in solitary confinement for misdemeanors. Not to mention the 14,000 hours of videotape that we can't see, but the stuff we can see shows the cops letting them in and waving them in. And in fact, in rare case of good news, you actually had a common sense judge that let one guy off. Very fortunate that he got before, a very rare type of judge these days that said, hey, the video does show the cops letting him in. Yeah, case closed and case dismissed. But you don't see any civil libertarians. No one. Tucker Carlson is the only one in the mainstream media that has really stood up for these guys at all. These people at all. Everyone else is absolute silence. And like that Facebook page, that reflects the state. A lot of my friends on the left that again, loved my work. I was real, friendly with them before. No, they want to hang these people. They are just, it's, and I can't talk to them. I don't want to, because they were supportive and everything, but I can't, talk to them anymore, because this, if you can't see the injustice here, they're blinded by the people who are there to support Trump, so they don't care. Like I said, I would feel the same way if these were BLM people or Antifa people, not that they would ever be treated like that, because the media would be making a production out of it. But if everything was the same, I would feel the same way. I don't care what it is. You can't hold people like that and put them in solitary confinement and beat them, especially if they're nonviolent and they're expressing their constitutional right. But they're basically telling you don't have the constitutional right. And now, again, setting another precedent. In the future, apparently, you are not going to be able to protest a vote. I mean, that's the constitutional right to go to a rally and protest, air your grievances against the electoral process and say, hey, look, there's some shenanigans going on here. So we've set even more dangerous precedents here, but there's nobody overturning it. The Republicans are silent. That's why they're no alternative. I don't see any of them. And Trump is holding rallies constantly. They're there because of him. This guy is not saying one thing about it. He should be talking about it at his rallies. It should be the top story. And he should be offering some of that $200 million or whatever he's raised. How about giving some of those people that are sitting in prison some money so they can hire some lawyers? But no, nobody's standing up for them.
Oh, yeah, I think that whole thing was a false flag.
Yeah.
And I think I've been saying it since like day one. I think it's a false flag. They used it to entrap people, and what they needed a physical event. It's, they could say, oh, well, Trump supporters are dangerous, and the QAnon people and the conspiracy crowd, and they think there's a new world order, even though Biden said it out loud, George W. Bush or H.W. Bush has said it, what's his name? I know Tony Blair has said it. The other one too, David, I can't remember his name. The other prime minister over there, all of them. Gordon Brown. That's who I was thinking of. Gordon Brown. He's called for a new world order.
Sure.
Kissinger has called for a new world. I mean, I'm sure that's a coincidence. I'm sure that's just a phrase. They all happen to use the same phrase, but I'm sure it's just a phrase, and it's a crazy, kooky conspiracy theory connected to Q, which was another psyop. And you could say it's another false flag event, but all of that was used to create this physical meme, because you only had people talking on message boards. You had people, and like, this is what I was referencing earlier too, when I said there's so many people that only know like 3% of the information, and then they run around, they start doing live streams and podcasts, and somehow those people get to, tons and tons of views. YouTube doesn't block them. I have thousands of subscribers, and I could upload a video and nobody sees it. You get
Yeah.
shadow banned, or they close your account out entirely. Like I got depersoned off of Facebook, Instagram. The only thing I have left social media wise is Twitter. I'm surprised I'm not off. I haven't been deep, but I'm shadow banned there. So like,
Yeah.
I know I am, because I'll tweet things and just nobody sees it. So like,
Yeah,
you
I'm
can tell
shadow
who's
banned on
shadow
Facebook,
banned and who's not.
Yes.
Unless you say I love Joe Biden and I think he's the greatest president in the history of the United States.
Yeah.
Then although he doesn't know he's president, so I think he thinks Joe Biden is the president, or he thinks he thinks Jill's the vice president, and he thinks Kamala's the president.
Yeah, I don't think he knows what it is. And this, again, we didn't. We are right. We're at this scene, and that's why, again, history is real history. Hidden history is important to look at, because these things, none of these things happen in a vacuum, man. It's just in my earlier book, Hidden History, which is Crimes and Cover-ups, is kind of a prequel to that. But Hidden History examined the JFK assassination up through the Obama years, because it was published before Trump came on the scene. But if you just look at the stuff that's happened since then, I mean, when you have, it's like a mathematical equation. If you have if you have one of those long, complex mathematical equations, if any of the numbers are wrong, the answer is going to be wrong. Well, in our case, all of the numbers are wrong. So you obviously can't get the right answer. So you just accept one lie after another. We accept the lie that Oswald killed JFK. Well, again, I spent my lifetime researching that. And again, it takes a couple days maybe of research to realize, okay, I don't know what happened, but they're lying really bad. They're really lying. Whoever killed JFK wasn't Oswald. 9/11, the other big, huge thing that has happened in our lifetimes. I mean, obviously, it was whatever happened. It wasn't 19 crazed Arab hijackers with box cutters and plastic knives doing it. Again, so we're just being lied to over and over again. And so again, you have the pandemic. This is I call it the greatest psyop in the history of the world. This is a worldwide pandemic, and I've said we've been at World War III. I wrote on my on Substack a while back. What if they gave a war and nobody knew? And I said, World War III is already here. It's been here since 2020, early 2020, because it's basically this is the first real world war. The other wars had a lot of nations involved. This one has every nation. And it's basically a war of the governments of the world against their own people. And that's where America stands right now. We are at war with the government. And the worst part of it is the majority of the citizens, especially here, are on the side of the government. They don't even seem to realize the war is being waged against them, and they're cheering it on. And so it's a war like we've never seen before, but it's just a question of ratcheting up the tyranny, and it gets crazier every day, because I mean, when you have something like the January 6th Commission, where they're going to widen their net and try to find more people that might have been in the area. I don't know, it's insanity, and there's so few voices out there that are trying to point out the emperor has no clothes, that are trying to say, hey, this is wrong. Let's pull back here. Let's stop the authoritarianism on steroids. The authoritarianism, the draconian stuff is everywhere. And there's nobody saying, wait a minute, let's lighten up here. No, nobody's doing that. They're cheering it on. And the cancel culture was an outgrowth of again, all this stuff we've seen for decades. It eventually got to this point where, the identity politics is now runs all politics, so that you have these crazy people on the left, and I was from the left, but the left now is absolutely batshit crazy. They're insane. And these people, if they don't like something, if they don't like the way it makes them feel, that offends me. So I want you, to at very least get fired. Maybe I want you to go to jail. Maybe I want you to be executed. And that's where identity politics is right now. I mean, I've said that if you gave a referendum, if you had some kind of a referendum, a national referendum on, let's say, what should we do with the 80 million people that voted for Trump? Shall we execute them? I would say that an overwhelming majority of the people that voted against Trump, that have Trump would say, yes, we need to execute them. I think that's the only thing that's going to satisfy me. That's where we are, man. I mean, we were already divided, and this, the pandemic thing has kind of set in and increased the division, but it breaks down among the same kind of lines. And ironically, the people that hate Trump are the ones that, that are embracing this COVID, and, they want the restrictions, they want the lockdowns, bring it on, give me another mask. But, and of course, they can't wait to get another vaccine every other week. But they seem unaware of the fact that Trump is out there bragging about creating the vaccine and urging people to take it. And so do his supporters. It's like, so the whole thing is just insanity. And it's you never run anything to talk to, but sometimes I feel like I'm just kind of watching all this in the corner of a loony bin.
Oh, I know how you feel. I'm sitting on the bench next to you, eating my cup of Jello, having, just looking at you, going, "Told you," right? And you're like, "Yeah, told you," and I'm like, "Right, we told everyone, but nobody was listening to us."
Talking to ourselves, yeah.
We were just talking to ourselves, basically. I know.
Yeah.
Oh man, it is crazy. People. You try to tell them, hey, it's wrong. You shouldn't force somebody to be vaccinated. Yeah, you should. It's for the greater good. And you're like, do you hear yourself? Should we start executing people for the greater good too? Well, maybe if they voted for, Trump, they're they're insurrectionists, they're evil. We should get rid of them. And it's amazing how fast people went down that slippery slope. And these are the same people that are like, I don't understand how the German people let Adolf Hitler get away with the things that he got away with. Well, you're experiencing it right now.
Right.
You're living in that tyranny right now. And, to your point about it being a worldwide thing, after the pandemic, was going for 6-7 months, and then, the elections were coming in.
Right.
You had Justin Trudeau, you had Joe Biden, and I can't remember. I think it was, I don't know if it was Jacinda Ardern or if she was running over in New Zealand there, or if it was someone in Australia. But and there was a couple other places too throughout Europe that the candidates that were running, they were all running with, surprisingly, same slogan, which was "Build Back Better."
Yes, Build Back Better. Yeah.
Now that's kind of weird. Why would all of these politicians from different political persuasions across the globe have the same message? Why would they have that same that's weird. Build back better. It almost sounds like you need to tear something down first, Don, before you can build it back better. And that's exactly what they were doing. That's the plan. And they were telling you right there, that's what we're going to do. And now they're right in your face. They're like, well, we're going to build a new world order. And 2 years ago, you were a conspiracy theorist. I was a conspiracy theorist. Anyone that mentioned the term New World Order was a crazy, kooky conspiracy tard. Right. There's no such thing, except now they're telling you there's such a thing. And there needs to be such a thing because of the COOF and because of war, except they're the ones that create the problems. Right. They create the problems and then go, well, we need to have this type of totalitarian, dictatorial one world government because we have to protect you from the bad things. And we're like, but you made the bad things. But no, don't pay attention to that. Don't look at that fact. We're going to protect you from it. It's like, dude, you're the one that made them. You don't want to protect us.
Right. Problem solution. Yeah. I mean, it's really amazing again that we've come to this point. And you're right about the tearing down part. And not that I interact with it, I live basically, I'm in the matrix, because I'm plugged into this online world. It's where all my friends are now. It's where all my activity is between that and writing full time. I'm on computers nonstop pretty much. So, but when I venture out into the real world, it just amazes me that it just seems to be running on fumes. You go to anywhere you go, everyone seems to be short staffed or things aren't getting done, and nobody seems to. Everybody seems to just kind of be going through the motions. It's not the same world. I mean, this has really devastated people's minds. I think even the people that are buying into it more than us, because they're still scurrying around and with fear, and you don't know whether you can shake anybody's hand. You can't do things that you always used to do. You certainly can't, hugging your relatives and things like that. You can't do that anymore. And it's horrible. I think Fauci said early on, we may never go back to shaking hands. Like, what? This is again, it's insanity, and what will come out of it, I don't know. But right now, we've already created an Orwellian world, and I'm sure it obviously it can get worse, but it's I don't. I have so little optimism because when I look around and I see the people that are buying this, and I realize how it's I don't try to tell anybody I know anymore because I've failed miserably for a long time trying to influence them, and they are buying into this, and they think people like us, they think we're just nuts to not be buying into it. And that's the problem is that they maybe they'll believe it when we're finally at the FEMA camps, but I'll tell you, I guess the same thing I tell all my people that I just know through the internet, but I feel like my friends. But I say, I want to meet all of you someday, but I don't want it to be in the FEMA camps. And unfortunately, I think that's the next step. Like I said earlier, I think I know in my family that if they gave all, they might not even have to give them $50 or anything. They might just say, hey, turn in your relatives and anonymously. I have no doubt that some of them would call and say, hey, this guy's not vaccinated. He's he's really dangerous. He has a little platform and he's saying all these crazy things, and I think he really needs some reindoctrination, and get a few jabs in there in the FEMA camp and see if we can't straighten him out. But I really don't think that's far from being reality. Unfortunately, it's just we're I think beyond where Orwell was talking about in his book.
They want to bring about the social credit system and the social credit
Yes.
score. And
yes,
that's the whole agenda here. That's why when they were another lie, I don't want to call it a psyop, but we'll say a straw man argument that was thrown out there was right after COVID started, was when they started pushing the vaccines, was in the conspiracy realm of things. Immediately it hit the social media that, oh, they're going to inject you with smart dust and they're going to inject you with little microchips. Now, that technology does exist. They have been DARPA and other agencies have been working on stuff like that for a very long time. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were injecting you with some sort of nano dust, or at the very least, there's the whole graphene oxide thing that's going on, which is weird. Okay, and that's a whole nother show. But my point is, the idea that they had put out there, this meme, was they're going to inject little tiny microchips in you, and they're going to control your brain. And people immediately, even though that would be their agenda down the road, I mean, that really is the agenda. They want to chip everybody, but that's not how they want to chip everybody. And they lead you down this easily beaten argument. They lead you down that path to that argument, and then a lot of people were like, oh yeah, that is stupid, and then they walked away from it. So now if you're like, well, the ultimate goal is to chip you, and they're like, oh God, you're one of those people. And it's like, no, I'm quoting Aaron Russo, who was interviewed back in 2007, and I've played that audio on the broadcast here before. And ever since COVID, I've been harping on this. And even before, long before they came out with the passports and everything, I was on with Kev one of the broadcasts, and he said to me, what do you think is going to come out of this? And I said, they're going to want to get digital currency. They're going to want to get rid of cash, which they immediately wanted to do. They'll probably try to chip everybody. And within a year, they're like, hey, you should get chipped. You could put your vaccine passport on the chip. And you might not have seen it much in America here, but in Europe, this is being pushed, and it was being pushed, and it'll still be pushed low key, where they'll say, well, it's easier. You don't have to you can put your wallet, and, you don't have to carry your credit cards. You don't have to carry your keys. You don't have to carry anything. You just have to have your chip, which is already implanted on you. Everything is linked to that chip. People are like, well, how keys? How could you get in your house without keys? Well, because eventually the idea is to put chip readers in the doorways. Again, this is what Aaron Russo talked about and warned about in 2007. He was told by one of the Rockefellers the end goal is to chip everyone, have everything linked to that chip. And then if you're a bad citizen, they just turn off your chip. And that goes hand in hand with the social credit score. If you're a bad citizen, your social credit score says, wow, Don Jeffries You wrote some books you shouldn't have written, young man. First of all, they all have to go into the bonfire over there. And then
Right.
you, young lad, you're going to be thrown out and exiled from public, and you're not going to be able to get into a building or even eat, have any food, have access to the basic things that a human needs to survive, because we're going to turn off your chip. How dare you, Donald? How dare you?
Right. And you exactly. You have Elizabeth Warren out here, who is the big foe of the bankers, who didn't want to audit the Federal Reserve, by the way. She has come out now and is one of the first real politicians to say, hey, we need a centralized digital currency, a CDC. And of course, that's the step, the digitalized currency. Exactly. That's going to do exactly what you're talking about. If they can get you dependent, I mean, right now you have some freedom, as long as cash is still as accepted, gold, silver, and everything. But if everything's, that's basically chipping people without chipping them. If you're tied to something like that where you can't, I'm sorry, there's no, you don't have no more, you don't have any more points on your card. Sorry, you come back next week. No food for you this week, or as you said, a social credit score. You're like, those last couple tweets you had. I'm sorry. You're not going to be able to eat this week. You're not going to be able to have no money this week for you. It's very dangerous. And again, it's unbelievable to me that people would even consider, but the population is so dumbed down. They're so trained to listen to anything that the state controlled journalists say, that they're literally going to believe everything. They'll present this as cool. And, the Saturday Night Live or somebody will, make fun of somebody if anybody dares to criticize it. And that's what they'll just go by that. They're like Pavlov's dogs at this point. They're salivating on cue. They're hearing the bell, and that's what the people we have to deal with are at that stage. They're completely controlled. They're thoroughly brainwashed, and it's just a shame, because we're going to have to deal with this. We're going to have to be the ones that I'm saving some cash, but I don't know if it's going to do any good. Because at some point they may, if they go to centralized digitalized currency, they eventually will just say, shut down any business that, will take cash, and then we'll have to go to bartering. That it may come to that eventually. But again, they'll probably try to stop that as well. But we may come full circle and go back to the way it was before we developed the monetary system, where you just barter. You just do things in exchange with your neighbors, exchange skills and services with each other.
I actually already do that. I trade eggs for all sorts of things, ammo, firearms. Former life, I was a diesel mechanic, so I trade that knowledge and that ability and my ability to do certain things for like the use of heavy equipment from my neighbors and stuff like that. No, we totally barter out here in the country.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know what kind of skills I have to barter with. That's the problem with somebody like me. I'm interesting I used to be interesting at parties, and I can talk about a lot of different things, but I don't know how valuable in a crisis being able to talk is. There's the guy over there is pointing out everything's wrong. But I wish I had more valuable skills, but I really don't, and that may come into play, obviously, because it looks like we could be. Who knows if we're headed for Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome? I don't know if it's going to be that kind of a world, but it could be. And obviously, it's going to get ugly if that's the case, because I don't want to see what it's like when all the increasingly obese America is running around, and they're tapping on their cell phones, and they can't get the towers, and they're wondering where the food is. And they're just basically going to be dropping dead, I guess, because how long can they survive? So it's not good. Nothing. I'm looking in the future. I just don't see anything good, unfortunately. I wish I did.
I used to joke around and say, like, when it hits the fan, the people like the Kardashians or the ones you see on the Real Housewives show, all these uber rich people, they can barely like make toast for themselves.
Yes.
Within the first 3 days, they're going to be dead.
Yep.
Like exactly. In like an apocalyptic type scenario, the first 3 days they're gone.
Yes.
72 hours. It'll weed them right out.
Now, remember they used to have that stupid show before the Kardashians, Paris Hilton and Nicole Richie, I think it was. I never saw it, but as I understand, like they would go shopping or go to gas station. And the whole thing was to show how they didn't know how to do anything. So they literally couldn't do anything. They didn't know how to shop. They did. I mean, for like groceries, they didn't know. They'd never done that. They didn't know how to pump gas, and it'll be a rude way. I can just imagine the skill set Kim Kardashian has. I mean, it's like she's. I'll give her, I'll give her a lot of credit. She's managed to take a big ass to astronomical heights because she's got nothing else. And if people stop paying her for that, it'd be interesting to see how long she'd last. I don't think it would be too long though.
Right. Well, that's who celebrity is now. The way she became famous was her mom leaked a sex tape, which was if you think about that, just think about that for a second. The way,
heartwarming.
Yes, and they've admitted basically that that's what happened. So Kris Kardashian, her mother, they had this sex tape, and her idea was, look, we'll get your name out there in the public because any attention's better than no attention.
Right.
And
right.
they did make an empire out of all of that. But
Yep.
I mean, your own mom was willing to sell you out.
How about that?
Like in a sexual manner in order to make all this money. And yeah, I mean, it made you famous and it made you uber rich, but just think about the moral, like her own mother, and she was okay with that. Like, I mean, obviously she was in on it, she was part of that whole thing.
Sure.
So well, I shouldn't say we, because it's not us. It's who society, or actually who the powers that shouldn't be, who are manipulating society, who they put up on a pedestal are people that are morally repugnant for a reason, because that's why they had that show too, because it helped to make, at that time, that was the first time that you had like reality TV coming out, and they admitted that they were going to start to this was around the same time too, where there used to be commercial actors, and then there used to be like actors like you've seen like TV and movies. And they admittedly, you can go back and research this. It was all around that same time period where there are still actors that are in commercials for sure, but a lot more famous people started to be included in commercials, and they used like movie stars sometimes playing their character in a commercial because it helps to blur the lines between reality and fiction and entertainment and what the real world is. And that's what the whole idea behind reality television was. Reality TV is not reality anything. It's all scripted. Even if it's not like, they don't really, not to say that they hand you a script, but you'll have producers that, I knew a girl years ago who was on this show called The Bad Girls Club. And I think this crap is still on TV, I think too. But it's basically, they take girls and they put them in a room, they put them in a house together. And they're young ladies that have maybe had trouble past or whatever, and they put them in and they get them drunk, and then they make them hang out, and there's always drama, and all the people are fist fighting and tearing each other's hair out. And it's just, they do that because that brings ratings, right? People want to see that on a primal level, like even if they don't realize it. It's like watching the gladiatorial games, but at the same time, they're also being programmed that that's how young ladies should act. So then, that's who, and it's this cycle that gets repeated and it keeps going. And I knew a young lady that was on this show years ago, and she told us that, after, she was off the show, she left. She said that one of the things that it was in their contract is they couldn't do drugs, obviously, because, that would be illegal to have in the contract. But they were, because alcohol was legal, they were forced by the contract to drink a lot in order to be drunk constantly. And then the producers knew that there were going to be fights, and she admitted that the producers egged things on. So you could see, when I say scripted, I don't mean that everybody has a script. It's just the producers, the people in the right positions, know how to manipulate things.
Right.
And they used that type of reality television to then turn around and look at what their young ladies are being taught now. I mean, I have 2 granddaughters, right? My daughters I have 4 stepdaughters, and I love them very much. They're all grown up and they are amazing young women. Okay. One of them has 2 daughters. So I have 2 granddaughters, and I worry about, like, thank God my stepdaughter is on top of things the way she is, and she's on point. And she's very aware as to the weird, sexual stuff that's even in little kids' TV programming.
Yes.
And she's like, yeah, I don't think this is appropriate. And like, she tries to, as best she can, not expose the kids to that kind of stuff, and I mean, and like seeing a lot of the newer stuff that's out now, it's incredible, Don, because the level of just chicanery that's out there is, oh, it's disgusting. But that's for a whole nother broadcast, because we got about 2 minutes left. I'm looking at the clock here. So really quick, promote all of your stuff again. Go out, put out like any of the podcasts you do, live streams, promote all your books, where people can buy them, Substack, everything. Go.
Okay, sounds good. The Donald Jeffries Show is every Wednesday from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on Ocelli.com. You can also find it. It gets rebroadcast many other places, and it gets archived over on America Unplugged at Rockfin. I am associated with that over there. I Protest airs every Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Live streams over my social media and also on rockfin.com. You can catch my writings at Substack at donaldjeffries.media. My older entries, I'm still writing there once in a while on my blog, but it goes back years. A lot of information there you can access, donaldjeffries.news. My books, I have 6 books out there. The newest is On Borrowed Fame, Money, Mystery, and Corruptions in the Entertainment World. You can find them anywhere. The book we've been talking about quite a bit tonight is Crimes and Cover-Ups in American Politics, 1776-1963, the history they didn't teach in school. And that one has a foreword by Ron Paul, very gratified that he was willing to write a foreword for that. So check it out, because history, the past is prologue, as Shakespeare told us. And if you know the past, you'll understand the present a lot better.
I agree. And Donald, thank you for all the work you do and everything that you've done over the years to put truth out there and to wake everybody up. You, sir, are definitely a legend and a fighter, and you have many skills. So even in a apocalyptic scenario, you'd be of a lot of use, my brother. You're a very smart man, and I appreciate you.
Well, thank you very much. And I appreciate you, and thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
Yes, always. Ladies and gentlemen, as I try to tell you, I always like to leave the broadcast on a positive note. As we leave, I want to tell you this. Okay, Donald's work will help you. I always tell you to be the change and go out and spread love and light and try to change the world for the better place. Well, to be able to do that properly, you have to be well researched, and you have to be able to understand what's going on and be able to explain it in an easy to understand manner to the people that you're trying to wake up. So please go get Donald's books so you can educate your own brain and yourself to then go out and pass that knowledge on correctly, because you need more than that 3% at the top of the information. You need to dig deeper and do some more research, and his books will do just that for you. So with that being said, I love you all very much. I believe in all of you, and I know that y'all are going to go out and make this world a better place. So go out and be the change this world needs. I love you all, and I'll see you all again live next week. We're out of here.